Welcome to Exploration Dreamland, a quiet read-aloud of the writings of explorers of the real world and the worlds of imagination. Drop anchor, relax into your comfortable bunk, and drift off to Dreamland with us as we read an abridged version of MIZORA, a Prophecy by Mary E. Bradley, published in book form in 1889. The story will be read in order, so if you would like to begin at the beginning, please start with Season 2, Episode 16. If you would like to stay in touch between episodes, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at Exploration Dreamland. If you would like to recommend a text, please email us at explorationdreamland, all one word, @gmail.com. You can also find our episodes on YouTube. Please subscribe or follow and review us wherever you find us. Your actions will help others find us too. Now, take a deep breath in, and as you exhale, relax any tension in your muscles. Close your eyes, snuggle into your sleeping space, and listen to tonight's tale. Chapter 10. When a question as to the existence of social distinctions would be asked the citizens of MIZORA, the invariable answer would be, there were none. Yet a long and intimate acquaintance with them assured me that there were. They had an aristocracy, but of so peculiar and amiable a kind that it deserves a special mention. It took a long time for me to comprehend the exact condition of their society in this respect, that there were really no dividing lines between the person who superintended the kitchen and the one who paid her for it, in a social point of view, I could plainly see. Yet there were distinctions, and rather sharply defined ones too. In order to explain more lucidly the peculiar social life of MIZORA, I will ask you to remember some charity fair you have attended, perhaps participated in, and which had been gotten up and managed by women of the highest social rank. If in a country where titles and social positions were hereditary, it then represented the highest aristocracy of blood. Grand dames there departed from the routine of their daily lives and assumed the lowlier occupations of others. They stood behind counters, in booths, and sold fancy articles, or dispensed ices and lemonade, or waited upon customers at the refreshment tables, bringing in trays of edibles, gathering up and removing empty dishes, performing labor that, under the ordinary circumstances of life, they would not perform in their own homes and for their own kindred. It was all done with the same conscious dignity and ease that characterized the statelier duties of their everyday life. One fact was apparent to all. They were gentlewomen still. The refinement of their home education and the charm of nourished beauty were, perhaps, more prominent in contrast with their assumed avocation. The charity fair, with its clerks and waiter girls and flower sellers called from the highest society, was a miniature picture of the actual everyday social life of MIZORA. The one who ordered a dinner at their finest hotel had it served to her by one who occupied the same social standing. Yet there was a difference, but it was the difference of mind. The student in sociology discovers that in all grades of society, congenial natures gravitate to a center. A differentiation of the highest mental quality was the result of this law in MIZORA and its coordinate part, their aristocracy. The social organism did not need legislation to increase its benefits. It turned to science, and, through science, to nature. The laboratory of the chemist was the focus that drew the attention of all minds. MIZORA might be called a great school of nature, whose pupils studied her every phase and pried into her secrets with persistent activity and obeyed her instructions as an imperative duty. They observed nature to be an economist and practiced economy with scrupulous exactness. They had observed that in all grades of animal life, from the lowest form to the highest, wherever sociality had produced unity, a leader was evolved, a superiority that differed in power according to the grade of development. In the earlier histories, the leaders were chosen for their prowess in arms. Great warriors became rulers, and soldiers were the aristocracy of the land. As civilization progressed and learning became more widely disseminated, the military retired before the more intellectual aristocracy of statesmanship. Politics was the grand entrance to social eminence. But, said my friend, we have arrived at a higher, nobler, grander age. The military and political supremacies lived out their usefulness and decayed. A new era arrived. The differentia of mind evolved an aristocracy. Science has long been recognized as the greatest benefactor of our race. Its investigators and teachers are our only acknowledged superiors and leaders. Generally, the grandest intellects and those which retain their creative power the longest are of exceptionally slow development. Precocity is short-lived and brilliant rather than strong. This I knew to be true of my own race. In MIZORA, a mind that developed late lost none of the opportunities that belong exclusively to the young of my own and other countries of the outer world. Their free schools and colleges were always open, always free. For this reason, it was no unusual thing for a person in MIZORA to begin life at the very lowest grade and rise to its supreme height. Whenever the desire awakened, there was a helping hand extended on every side. The distinction between the aristocracy and the lower class, or the great intellects and the less, was similar to the relative positions of teacher and pupil. I recognized in this social condition the great media of their marvelous approach to perfection. This aristocracy was never arrogant, never supercilious, never aggressive. It was what the philosophers of our world are: tolerant, humane, sublime. In all communities of civilized nations, marked musical talent will form social relations distinct from, but not superior to, other social relations. The leader of a musical club might also be the leader of another club devoted to exclusive literary pursuits, and both clubs possess equal social respect. Those who possess musical predilections seek musical associations. Those who are purely literary seek their congenials. This is true of all other mental endowments or tastes. That which predominates will seek its affinity, be it in science, literature, politics, music, painting, or sculpture. Social organizations naturally grow out of other business pursuits and vocations of all grades and kinds. The society of MIZORA was divided only by such distinctions. The scientific mind had precedence of all others. In the social world, they found more congenial pleasure in one another, and they mingled more frequently among themselves. Other professions and vocations followed their example for the same reason. Yet neither was barred by social caste from seeking society where she would. If the artisan sought social intercourse with a philosopher, she was expected to have prepared herself by mental training to be congenial. When a citizen of MIZORA became ambitious to rise, she did not have to struggle with every species of opposition and contend against rebuff and repulse. Correct language, refined tastes, dignified and graceful manners were the common acquirements of all. Mental culture of so high an order, I marveled that a lifetime should be long enough to acquire it in, was universal. Under such conditions, social barriers could not be impregnable. In a world divided by poverty and opulence into all their intermediate grades, wealth must inevitably be preeminent. It represents refined and luxurious environments and, if mind be there, intellectual preeminence also. Where wealth alone governs society, it has its prerogatives. The wealth that affords the most luxurious entertainments must be the wealth that rules. Its privilege, its duty rather, is to ignore all applicants to fraternization that cannot return what it receives. Where mind is the sole aristocracy, it makes demands as rigid, though different, and mind was the aristocracy of MIZORA. With them, education is never at an end. I spoke of having graduated at a renowned school for young ladies, and when I explained that to graduate meant to finish one's education, it elicited a peal of silvery mirth. "We never graduate," said Juana. "There is my mamma's mother, 2 centuries old and still studying. I paid her a visit the other day, and she took me into her laboratory. She is a manufacturer of lenses and has been experimenting on microscopes. She has one now that possesses a truly wonderful power. The leaf of a pear tree that she had allowed to become moldy was under the lens, and she told me to look. A panorama of life and activity spread out before me in such magnitude that I can only compare it to the feeling one must possess who could be suspended in air and look down upon our world for a cycle of time. Immense plains were visible with animals grazing upon them that fought with and devoured one another. They perished and sank away, and immense forests sprang up like magic. They were inhabited by insects and tiny creatures resembling birds. A sigh of air moved the leaf, and a tiny drop of water, scarcely discernible to the naked eye, rolled over the forests and plains, and before it passed to the other side of the leaf, a great lake covered the spot. My great-great-grandmother has an acute conductor of sound that she has invented, so exquisite in mechanism as to reveal the voice of the tiniest insect. She put it to my ear, and the bellowing of the animals in battle, the chirp of the insects, and the voices of the feathered mites could be clearly heard, but attenuated like the delicate note of two threads of spun glass clashed together. "And what good," I asked, "can all this knowledge do you? Your great-great-grandmother has condensed the learning of 2 centuries to evolve this one discovery. Is it not so?" "Yes," replied Juana, and her look and tone were both solemn. "You ask me what good it can do? Reflect, if the history of a single leaf is so vast and yet ephemeral, what may not be the history of a single world? What, after all, are we, when such an infinitesimal space can contain such wonderful transactions in a second of time?" I shuddered at the thought she raised in my mind, but inherited beliefs are not easily dissipated, so I only sought to change the subject. "But what is the use of studying all the time? There should be some period in your lives when you should be permitted to rest from your labors. It is truly irksome to me to see everybody still eager to learn more. The artist of the kitchen was up to the National College yesterday attending a lecture on chemistry. The artist who arranges my rooms is up there today listening to one on air. I cannot understand why, having learned to make beds and cook to perfection, they should not be content with their knowledge and their work." "If you were one of us, you would know," said Juana. "It is a duty with us to constantly seek improvement. The culinary artist at the house where you are visiting is a very fine chemist. She has a predilection for analyzing the construction of food. She may someday discover how to produce vegetables from the elements. The artist who arranges your room is attending a lecture on air because her vocation calls for an accurate knowledge of it. She attends to the atmosphere in the whole house and sees that it is in perfect health-sustaining condition. Your hostess has a particular fondness for flowers and decorates all her rooms with them. All plants are not harmless occupants of living rooms. Some give forth exhalations that are really noxious. That artist has so accurate a knowledge of air that she can keep the atmosphere of your home in a condition of perfect purity. Yet she knows that her education is not finished. She is constantly studying and advancing. The time may come when she, too, will add a grand discovery to science. Had my ancestors thought as you do and rested on an inferior education, I should not represent the advanced stage of development that I do. As it is, when my mind reaches the age of my mother's, it will have a larger comprehensiveness than hers. She already discerns it. My children will have intellects of a finer grade than mine. This is our system of mind culture. The intellect is of slower development than the body and takes longer to decay. The gradations of advancement from one intellectual basis to another in a social body requires centuries to mark a distinct change in the earlier ages of civilization. But we have now arrived at a stage when advancement is clearly perceptible between one generation and the next. Juana's mother added, "Universal education is the great destroyer of castes. It is the conqueror of poverty and the foundation of patriotism. It purifies and strengthens national as well as individual character." In the earlier history of our race, there were social conditions that rendered many lives wretched, and that the law would not, and, in the then state of civilization, could not reach. They were termed domestic miseries and disappeared only under the influence of our higher intellectual development. The nation that is wise will educate its children. Alas, alas, was my own silent thought. When will my country rise to so grand an idea? When will wealth open the doors of colleges, academies, and schools, and make the fountain of knowledge as free as the God-given water we drink? And there rose a vision in my mind, one of those daydreams when fancy upon the wing takes some definite course, and I saw in my own land a temple of learning rise, grand in proportion, complete in detail, with a broad gateway over whose wide-open, majestic portal was the significant inscription, "Enter who will, no warder stands watch at the gate." Chapter 11. The government of MIZORA not being of primary importance in the estimation of the people, I have not made more than a mere mention of it heretofore. In this respect, I have conformed to the generally expressed taste of the MIZORA people. In my own country, the government and the aristocracy were identical. The government offices and emoluments were the highest pinnacles of ambition. I mentioned the disparity of opinion between MIZORA and all other countries I had known in regard to this. I could not understand why politics in MIZORA should be of so small importance. The answer was that among an educated and highly enlightened people, the government will take care of itself. Having been perfected by wise experience, the people allow it to glide along in the grooves that time has made for it. In form, the government of MIZORA was a federal republic. The term of office in no department exceeded the limit of 5 years. The presidential term of office was for 5 years. They had one peculiar, exceedingly peculiar law in regard to politics. No candidate could come before the public seeking office before having a certificate from the state college to which she belonged, stating her examination and qualifications to fill such an office. Just like examining for school teachers, I thought. And why not? Making laws for a state is of far more importance than making them for a few dozen scholars. I remembered having heard some of my American acquaintances say that in their country it was not always qualifications that get a candidate into office. Some of the ways were devious and not suitable for publicity. Offices were frequently filled by incompetent men. There had been congressmen and other offices of higher and more responsible duties filled by persons who could not correctly frame a sentence in their native language, who could not spell the simplest words as they were spelled in the dictionary, unless it was an accident. To seek the office of president, or any other position under the general government, required an examination and certificate from the National College. The examinations were always public and conducted in such a manner that imposture was impossible. Constituents could attend if they chose and decide upon the qualifications of a favorite candidate. In all the public schools, politics, to a certain extent, formed part of the general education of every child. Beyond that, anyone having a predilection for politics could find in the state colleges and national colleges the most liberal advantages for acquiring a knowledge of political economy, political arithmetic, and the science of government. Political campaigns, if such a term could be applicable to the politics of MIZORA, were of the mildest possible character. The papers published the names of the candidates and their examinations in full. The people read and decided upon their choice, and, when the time came, voted. And that was the extent of the campaign enthusiasm. I must mention that the examinations on the science of government were not conducted as our ordinary examinations in any given study that consists of questions and answers. That was the preliminary part. There followed a thorough, practical test of their ability to discharge the duties of office with wisdom. No matter which side the sympathies or affections might be enlisted upon, the stern decree of justice was what the MIZORian abided by. From earliest infancy their minds were trained in that doctrine. In the discharge of all public duties especially, it seemed to be the paramount consideration. Certainly no government machinery ever could move with more ease or give greater satisfaction to the people than that of MIZORA. They never appeared to be excited or uneasy about the result of the elections. I never heard an animated political argument such as I used to read about in America. I asked a politician one day what she thought of the probable success of the opposite party. She replied that it would not make any difference to the country, as both candidates were perfectly competent to fill the office. "Do you never make disparaging statements about the opposing candidate?" was my inquiry. "How could we?" she asked in surprise, "when there are none to make?" "You might assume a few for the time being, just to make her lose votes." "That would be a crime worthy of barbarians." "Do you never have any party issues?" "No, there is never anything to make an issue of. We all work for the good of the people, and the whole people. There is no greed of glory or gain, no personal ambition to gratify. Were I to use any artifice to secure office or popularity, I should be instantly deprived of public esteem and notice. I do my duty conscientiously. That is the aim of public life. I work for the public good, and my popularity comes as it is earned and deserved. I have no fear of being slighted or underrated. Every politician feels and acts the same way. Have politicians ever bought votes with money or offered bribes by promising positions that it would be in their official power to grant when elected? Never. There is not a citizen of MIZORA who would not scorn an office obtained in such a way. The profession of politics, while not to be compared in importance with the sciences, is yet not devoid of dignity. It is not necessary to make new laws. They were perfected long ago, and what has been proven good, we have no desire to change. We manage the government according to a conscientious interpretation of the law. We have repealed laws that were in force when our republic was young, and dropped them from the statute books. They were laws unworthy of our civilization. We have laws for the protection of property and to regulate public morals, and while our civilization is in a state of advancement that does not require them, yet we think it wisdom to let them remain. The people know that we have such laws and live up to them without surveillance. They would abide by the principles of justice set forth in them just as scrupulously if we should repeal them. You spoke of bribes. In remote ages, when our country was emerging from a state of semi-barbarism, such things were in common practice. Political chicanery was a name given to various underhand and dishonest maneuvers to gain office and public power. It was frequently the case that the most responsible positions in the government would be occupied by the basest characters, who used their power only for fraud to enrich themselves and their friends by robbing the people. They deceived the masses by preaching purity. They were never punished. If they were accused and brought to trial, the wealth they had stolen from the government purchased their acquittal, and then they posed as martyrs. The form of government was then, as now, a federal republic, but the people had very little to do with it. They were merely the tools of unscrupulous politicians. In those days, a sensitively honest person would not accept office because the name politician was a synonym for flexible principles. It was derogatory to one's character to seek office. Was dishonesty more prominent in one party than another? I asked, thinking how very Americanish this history sounded. We, who look back upon the conditions of those times and view it with dispassionate judgment, can perceive corruption in both political parties. The real welfare of the country was the last thing considered by a professional politician. There was always something that was to benefit the people brought forward as a party issue and used as a means of working up the enthusiasm or fears of the people, and usually dropped after the election. The candidate for election in those days might be guilty of heinous crimes, yet the party covered them all, and over that covering, the partisan newspaper spread every virtue in the calendar. A stranger to the country and its customs reading one of their partisan newspapers during a political campaign might conclude that the party it advocated was composed of only the virtues of that country, and their leader an epitome of the supremest excellence. Reading in the same paper a description of the opposing party, the stranger might think it composed of only the degraded and disreputable portion of the nation, and its leader the scum of all its depravity. If curiosity should induce a perusal of some partisan paper of the other party, the same thing could be read in its columns with a change of names. It would be the opposite party that was getting represented in the most despicable character, and their leader was the only one who possessed enough honesty and talent to keep the country from going to wreck. The other party leader was the one who was guilty of all the crimes in the calendar. A vast number of people were ignorant enough to cling blindly to one party and to believe every word published by its partisan papers. This superstitious party faith was what the unscrupulous politicians handled dexterously for their own selfish ends. It was not until education became universal and a higher culture was forced upon the majority that politics began to purify itself and put on the dignity of real virtue and receive the respect that belongs to genuine justice. The people became disgusted with defamatory political literature, and the honorable members of both parties abjured it altogether. In such a government as this, two great parties could not exist, where one was altogether bad and the other altogether good. It became apparent to the people that there was good in both parties, and they began to elect it irrespective of party prejudice. Politicians began to work for their country instead of themselves and their party, and politics took the noble position that the rights of humanity designed it for. I have been giving you quite a history of our ancient politics. Our present condition is far different. As the people became enlightened to a higher degree, the government became more compact. It might now be compared to a large family. There are 100 states in the Union. There was a time when every state made its own laws for its own domestic government. One code of laws is now enforced in every state. In going from one state to another, citizens now suffer no inconvenience from a confusion of laws. Every state owes allegiance to the general government. No state or number of states could set up an independent government without obtaining the consent and legal dissolution from the general government. But such a thing will never be thought of. We have prospered as a great united nation. Our union has been our strength, our prosperity. I visited with Wauna a number of the state's capitals. In architecture, the MIZORA people display an excellent taste. Their public buildings might all be called works of art. Their government buildings, especially, were on a scale of magnificent splendor. The hollow square seemed to be a favorite form. One very beautiful Capitol building was of crystal glass, with facing and cornices of marble onyx. It looked more like a gigantic gem than anything I could compare it to, especially when lighted up by great globes of white fire suspended from every ceiling. Upon my entrance into MIZORA, I was led into the belief that I had arrived at a female seminary, because the dining and sleeping accommodations for the stateswomen were all in the Capitol building. I observed that the state capitals were similarly accommodated. In MIZORA, the home is the heart of all joy, and wherever a MIZORA woman goes, she endeavors to surround herself with its comforts and pleasures. Another reason for the homes of all officials of the government being within the public buildings was because all the personal expenses, excepting clothing, were paid by the government. The salaries of government positions were not large compared with those of the sciences, but as their social and political dues were paid out of the public treasury, the salaries might be considered as net profit. This custom had originated many centuries in the past. In those early days, when a penurious character became an incumbent of public office, the social obligations belonging to it were often but parsimoniously requited. Sometimes business embarrassments and real necessity demanded economy, so at last the government assumed all the expenses contingent upon every office, from the highest to the lowest. By this means, the occupant of a government office was freed from every care but those of state. The number and style of all social entertainments that were obligatory of the occupant of a public office were regulated by law. As the people of MIZORA believed in enjoyment, the entertainments provided by the government as the necessary social dues of its officers were not few nor scantily furnished. Stay tuned for the next segment from MIZORA, A Prophecy by Mary E. Bradley. Please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast app. Keep in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, and recommend us to anyone you know who could use a quiet break or a little help falling asleep. Exploration Dreamland is produced, edited, and hosted by me, Sarah Vanzaley. A big thank you to Project Gutenberg for helping me find this and many other interesting publications. Thanks also to Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com for providing the theme music for this show. The title of this piece is Kalimba Relaxation Music, if you would like to visit his website to hear it in its entirety. Sweet dreams.